Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for being here today. My name is Lisa Himmelman. I am the Assistant Director of Alumni Engagement at HGSE. It's wonderful to see so many of our alumni in one place. I'm glad you could be here. Before we get started, I do have some light housekeeping items I wanted to review. So as you can see, we're hosting today's session in a meeting style, so feel free to keep your camera on or turn it off, whichever is your preference. We are also recording the session and distributing it to everyone who registered afterwards. You will notice that you're currently muted, and we do ask that you remain muted when you're not speaking. This is meant to be an interactive session, though, so everyone will have the opportunity to raise their hands and go off mute to ask your questions and have a discussion later on in the session. We also invite you to use the chat for this purpose, and both Emily Williams and I will be moderating the chat. We have closed captioning available for today's session, so if you'd like to see the captions, please click on the CC/live transcript button, then click on show subtitles. You can also turn off subtitles by clicking on live transcript, then click hide subtitle. And then finally, we'd love to get a sense of you here today. So if you could please put into the chat your HGSE degree, your program or concentration, where you're joining us from, and your current role. That would be great. And so finally, I am really pleased and excited to introduce the session and our facilitator, Corey Splain, the class of 2022. Corey is joined by our panelists, Yulia Korovikov, class of 18, Joelle Balthasar, class of 18, Jessica Marinova Todd, class of 03, and Xander Bennett, class of 22. So Corey, take it away.
Thanks so much, Lisa, and thank you all for joining us today for this industry chat. As Lisa mentioned, I'm Corey Splain. I'm the Chief of Staff of the Division of Enrollment Management at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So busy time of year for Division of Enrollment Management, admissions, financial aid, all that. But I'm so happy to be facilitating today's chat. And I'm joined by some other Hugsy alums with a vast array of experience to talk about higher education today. How we're going to do this today is I've compiled a short list of questions to ask the panelists to get the conversation going, and then we'll open it up to the group for your questions and thoughts, just as Lisa said. To get started, though, we're going to have each panelist share their name, their current role and organization that they work for, as well as what an overview of what a typical day is like for them. And we're going to start with Joelle.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Joelle Balthasar, and I finished from the Ed School in 2018. I am currently an assistant dean and the first year class dean at Pomona College in Claremont, California. No day looks the same for me in my position. So I'm very student facing and student support based with first year students. And the majority of my job is lots of student meetings, checking in with them and seeing how they're doing, both on the personal and well-being end, but also on the academic end of things. So my job is typically every day meeting with students who are seeking me out or those who I have sought out to see how they're doing, and also connecting them with resources throughout the college that may be beneficial for them during their time here.
Thanks, Joelle. Xander.
Hey everyone, I'm Alexander Bennett, go by Xander. I am a graduate of 22 along with Corey from the higher ed program. And my current position is Major Gift Officer at Wentworth Institute of Technology, which is located here in Boston, across the Museum of Fine Arts. So again, my days look very different, but my main job is fundraising transformative gifts for the university. So there are kind of two modes that I operate in. One is research and strategy. So that is kind of internal time, like when I'm here in my office. I'm looking at our alumni, our friends, different companies and relationships that we have with the university, and who might be a good person to talk to see about putting together a scholarship application or something like that. And then on the other side of things, I'm actually going out there and spending some time on the road. We are a college that has a lot of draw in the New England area. So I have a couple of different states that I work with, as well as a number of prospects in the greater Boston area, and going out to possibly job sites or having meetings to be able to share news about the university, things that are going on, and then also make a pitch for support.
Thanks so much, Xander. Yulia.
Hey all, my name is Yulia Kravikov. Graduated in 18, also from the higher ed program. I am an associate dean and director of recruitment at Swarthmore College. We are a small residential liberal arts college just outside of Philadelphia. So on behalf of the city of Philadelphia, go Birds. It's similar to the same thing as everyone else has said. There is no such thing as a standard day. We are very seasonal in our work. So in the fall, we are often traveling and talking to students on the road, or we're flying students to our campus to get to know more about liberal arts institutions. In the winter, we read applications. In the spring, we put on admitted student programming and work with our transfer populations. And in the summer, we either take blessed vacation or like sit and wait for the Supreme Court to decide what we are and are not allowed to do. So a real mixed bag of the standard day for us, but thrilled to be here.
Thanks, Julia. So true. And we'll leave with Stefka.
Hi, my name is Stefka Marina-Vatad. I graduated from the Human Development and Psychology. I believe it's changed its name now in 2003, so a long time ago. I'm currently an associate professor at the School of Audiology and Speech Sciences here at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, Canada. Overview, same for me, no day is the same. As a university professor, we basically have three main components of our academic jobs, which is teaching, research, and administration or service. So if you're really well organized, you can have each day devoted to one of those three components, but most of us are not, so I do everything at once. But generally, that's what keeps the job exciting and interesting and unpredictable on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you all for sharing what you're doing now. I think it's typical in higher education that you kind of move all over the place. So I thought a good way to start out our questions would be to ask, what was your first job in higher education? And we'll start off with Stefka.
I'm not sure what you mean, Corey. So do you mean post-graduation from Hugsy or any, because my first job, I'd say, was a research assistant in my master's program. And then I was a TA for a while, but ultimately after I graduated from Hugsy, I became a professor at where I am currently. So I've been here for 20 years.
Yeah, so the teaching was definitely a strain throughout yours. Yeah.
For sure, yeah.
How about you, Julia?
Maybe not wildly surprisingly, I was in admissions. And then I went to grad school and then did admissions and now different admissions. But I started off at my alma mater at Tufts University, so real close to the ed school.
Thanks. How about you, Xander?
Yeah, so mine also was kind of, I think it is surprising for someone coming out of an undergraduate. So my degree was in English literature analysis, and I took a job at University of Pennsylvania in gift accounting and records. So numbers, not my forte. But it was a really important learning experiences, not because I loved the job, but because being on the very back end of giving, I really got to understand how a university works, the different stakeholders, and also what motivates a individual to or company to give a gift, a charitable donation where they don't really get anything in return. So in doing fundraising now, having that background has been very useful, as well as some work in accounting and the way that different funds are arranged at schools. So it was kind of a journey from the very back end and doing a lot of work in databases to now actually going out there and talking on behalf of the school.
Thanks for sharing. And Joelle?
So I actually did go straight from undergrad to the ed school. So then straight out of the ed school, I did get my first job. And my first job was, I was a hall director at Arizona State University in a first-year residence hall. And I had a building of about a total of 800 students, a staff of about 60, like 25, resident assistants. And then I also had a desk staff. I had a co-director, thank God, but yeah, I was doing lots of work with my student staff and supporting their programming efforts, as well as supporting the students in the hall who were, roommate conflicts to crises to just needing help. And, I was living in the hall. So I did on-call hours. I did other departmental things like student success management meetings. Other places would call it behavioral intervention team or care teams, etc. It was a little bit of everything, which is what I think most people would say Res Life kind of is, but it was incredibly student facing. I definitely saw more students than I saw my colleagues. So yeah.
Thank you all for sharing. I think it's always so interesting whether or not folks end up staying in the same area of higher ed or moving around, and how it influences where you end up. So our next question is, how did your experience at Hugsy influence how you approach your current role? And we can start with Xander.
Sure. Yeah. So my experience at Hugsy was actually a little bit unique. So I was working for Harvard College Fund with the intention of applying to Hugsy, knowing that I could make use of a part-time program that was offered at the time. And that is where I met Corey. And so I was actually working a full-time job while doing the master's program over the course of 2 years at Hugsy. So everything that I did for work informed my school, and everything from school informed my work. And that was actually a really, really powerful combination, because in so much of my day-to-day work, we were worried about fundraising. I was running a reunion annual campaign. So every single year was a brand new campaign and a brand new reunion class that we were working with. But what Hugsy did was it imparted some more nuance to the way that I was approaching the work. And again, the question that I'm always asking myself and asking other people is, why do you choose to give back? So I think of classes like Alexis Redding's college student development class, and talking about like place attachment, right? So we go through these, especially for undergraduates, these spaces that we have, really transformative experiences. And maybe that's a motivator for someone to want to give back. Also looking at the history of higher education in the United States. I don't think the class is offered anymore, but it was offered by Professor Rubin. And understanding that, the first college in the United States, Harvard College, really wasn't for personal gain. It was more, how do we educate community leaders, and particularly in a religious sense at that time. So thinking about the purposes of a college and what we are doing to perpetuate it and move it forward and help it grow, but also the promise that higher education makes, to its graduates and to society, and leveraging those things to, solicit donations that at the end of the day, you get a tax credit, but someone doesn't give, $5 million, they give it because they believe in the institution, hopefully. So those are some of the ways that Hugsy really influenced, my current career path. And, having graduated with a degree, 2 years ago now, it was kind of more of a stamp of approval to say that, I'm very proficient in the hard skills of my job, but also I can be extremely useful in helping to plot the course of a college into the future and what that will look like and who's going to pay for it.
Thanks, Xander. How about you, Stefka?
Well, to paraphrase Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz, I would say, Auntie Am, there's no place like Hugsy. And not to sound cheesy, but I think in this group here, I can be honest. It's a very unique experience, and I love every moment. And we all can agree that the opportunities that we get while at Hugsy, not just in coursework and interaction with fellow students and faculty members, but also just all the visitors who came and gave talks, is something I don't believe you can experience very many other places. So this is all to say that I felt privileged and I felt spoiled. And I don't know whether it was unique, but I also felt I can do anything, or basically I was trained in a way to believe that I can do anything I want, as long as, of course, it's reasonable, it makes sense, and I can convince people that it's the right approach. But this is all to say that once I moved away from the ed school, I found that I needed to have a lot of faith in myself, and also to learn to say no. Because while I was at Hugsy, I've pretty much never experienced anybody saying just no for no good reason, or again, as I said, the doors were always generally open and the opportunities were always there. So that was one of the main differences, I'd say, when it took me a while to move to a new environment where saying no was really important, because you can quickly get overwhelmed with a lot of extra work and tasks that you may not have anticipated.
Thanks for sharing. How about you, Joelle?
Yeah, so my time at Hugsy was really helpful for me in terms of understanding like the politics within higher education and especially institutions. As I mentioned, I went straight from undergrad to grad school, and I hadn't worked professionally. I had done, RA work, or I had done, student assistant work, things like that. But I hadn't worked full time. And so, during the ed school, my time there, getting to do the pro seminar with Judy McLaughlin was really impactful for me because I was hearing my peers talk about their experiences, and we were looking at articles, and there was, faculty and staff relations, and then community tensions with the broader, college region, right? And so those were not things that I had been thinking of. I went into the ed school saying, I want to work in student services. I want to work in student affairs. That's what I wanted to do. And I had viewed it as being very much just like, you're the people who work with the students, done, right? But my time, I think, at Hugsy really did help me to understand that there's so many different players, right, involved in a student's time and a student's experience. And it was really helpful for me because now with where I'm at as an assistant dean, I do work with faculty and supporting students who need it, whether it's academic, whether it's personal. Students are telling faculty how they're doing and what's going on, and faculty are asking me, hey, how should I respond to this? How can I help them? What does that look like? Or how can you help them? And what does that look like? And it's been really helpful with me being able to kind of explain what my position is, what I understand their position is, and how we work together. And so that we aren't having tension, so that we are understanding both of our positions, but the end goal of supporting the student and making sure the student has what they need to be successful at the college. So I think Hugsy's, my time there really opened my eyes to how I can navigate those relationships while also kind of not stepping on other folks' toes.
Yeah, that's super key. Yulia.
It's always fun when you're last because I'm like, oh, I know when I speak now. Mine was mostly, so Joel and I were the same year, which was very, very fun. I feel like a lot of what I gained was also in pro-sem of hearing from others about their experiences, students who were community college transfers, who then proceeded into a 4-year, who are now at the ed school, students who came from more and less resource backgrounds and their pathways to higher education and how that can look different based on things entirely out of their control. A lot of my coursework, my internship at Kofi, it all gave me, I feel like, the skills to be a better advocate, where now I can be a little bit more blunt and frankly, like almost more rude at times because I have the facts to back me up. So when a family comes in and they say, oh, how do you expect us to pay for this? Like, you're so expensive. I'm like, well, we meet full need. And then if they say they don't qualify for financial aid, I can say, well, did you know that the average family income is $60,000? Like, just to kind of put people back into the national context. Or when faculty members will say, oh, this place is so hard for XYZ reason. And I'm like, no, we're doing really well. Like, we don't have to worry about butts and seats. We have an unbelievable endowment. Like, our problems can be real problems. But also in the broader scale of higher education, we are an unbelievably privileged institution. And just having that backing, not only in the relational pieces that Joelle had mentioned, but also in policy conversations in the office around standardized testing. What is the research behind standardized testing? What is the, from the history of being founded for eugenic purposes to now the unbelievable disparities in access to testing and testing prep. Having all of that is really, really useful because it lets me be a more effective thorn in people's side. And I feel like that is a really fun title that I get to hold, partially because I think Stefka had said, yeah, you've got the little stamp of the ed school, which Harvard is a lovely institution. There are many lovely institutions that are not Harvard, and being able to say that, oh, I did do this thing, unfortunately gives us more credibility to be better thorns in other people's sides. So I do feel like we have an obligation to step up and say, no, there are other really excellent institutions out there. There are other pathways to success that don't need to be going through these name brand institutions. They're lovely, but you can live a happy, healthy life not through here. And so it's this kind of double-edged sword of I need the institution's credibility to shut down the institution. So it's maybe not the most consistent of thoughts. But generally, like the ed school made me a better and a more effective advocate. And I feel like that is something that I'm unbelievably grateful for, because that's basically the root of probably most of our work. To Xander's point, we're all in this in higher ed for a reason, and it is because we believe in this as a field. And so our duty is to the field. That was a long answer.
Thanks, Yulia. I like your response about thinking about the broader perspective and other people's problems, because I know as an institution that over-enrolled 2 years in a row, it was hard to explain to people that that was a good problem to have compared to others. All right, so our next question is, from your perspective, what do you feel is the biggest challenge facing higher education? And I think we probably could do this whole entire industry chat on this, but we'll try and keep it brief. And we'll start with Joelle.
I think the elephant in the room, of course, would be affirmative action, right? Like that is a really big concern, not just on the admissions end, but also on the student life end. You know, cultural clubs and organizations, or ones that are identity-based, you know, there's a lot of concern on the student life end about what does that look like now for these students? How do they navigate policy, et cetera? So I think that for me, that has been something that I've more so been really seeing and not necessarily a part of. But within my position and in my role, the thing that I've seen, and it's been looming for over a decade and some change now, has been student mental health. And I think, you know, a lot of student mental health conversations are framed around their experiences at the college. But from my viewpoint, I am seeing more and more students enter institutions having already encountered or who are already managing their own mental health, whether that's they've already been previously diagnosed, or maybe they didn't have access back home. So now they're in college and they're seeking those resources, but it's also hard to manage as a student. It's been incredibly challenging to see that as a staff member, because it's also about them navigating healthcare sometimes for the first time independently as a college student. It's about them also learning how they want to navigate, you know, disability access and resources and accommodations. It's about them having conversations with faculty when they need to about these things, right? And so I think that the mental health conversation obviously goes into the greater context of what does this look like, especially for, you know, teens. I'm working with traditional age college students for the most part. And so what does that look like before you get to a you know, college? Being in a new place, moving across the country, or just leaving home in general is hard enough. But then managing that on top of, you know, managing a transition like that on top of already encountered mental health issues, it has become an increasingly alarming problem over the last 5 years of my career. So I'm very interested to see what that will look like in future years, how not just colleges will continue to work toward, you know, working with students on that, but also what does this look like for educating the youth on how they can advocate for themselves and manage this.
Thanks, Joel. I think that's definitely at a tipping point. Yulia.
I was nodding vigorously during Joelle's answer. We see a lot of that in the admissions side. Corey, I'm sure you also see it, where the essays are, like, I will often say the kids are not doing all right. And it's really, really hard, especially with that longevity of being able to see what the application was like 10 years ago versus now. Like, it is actively different. On a broader industry scale, I feel like the public trust in higher education, we had this concept, you know, 30, 40 years ago, that higher ed is for society, benefiting this one individual benefits all of us. And so there's value in having well-funded public institutions. There's value in having it be more accessible to all people. But even that always came with a light asterisk of, once we really started leaning into college access, as especially the more selective institutions started leaning more into the idea of college access, it feels like the funding and the support for college started to dwindle away, which I'm not going to assign motive to that, but that is like an interesting combination. So I feel like this idea of college as a private good, education as a private good, as opposed to as a public good, is really hard, because then it ripples into everything else, like faculty tenure, like public school funding, like community college pathways. all of those pieces, like what you can and cannot teach in schools. I think that distrust is really tough, and ends up harming our most marginalized students in a way that, like, frankly, they don't need more. Like that's just not the case. So I feel like that as a compounding problem is something that I don't really know how to fix, but is definitely going to keep, I think, getting worse and worse.
Definitely. Stefka.
I completely agree that even in Canadian context, we have some of the same challenges. Mental health, diversity, etc. I would also add funding, but I thought somebody else might talk about that, just generally funding students and supporting them in their programs. But I'd like to focus on more of the academic faculty perspective. I also find time is something that we lack. And by time, I don't just mean, of course, we're all busy and we all have lots of things to do, but in higher education, I feel it's unfortunate that because we're so busy, or some of the expectations on faculty members in particular have been all focused on numbers, so quantity over quality. So how many we're promoted generally and based on how many publications you have, how many grant dollars do you bring to the university, how many graduate students you've supervised, and all of that pushes people to focus more again on the quantity rather than the quality of what we produced. And I really wish we had more time to focus more on reflect on what's meaningful, what truly makes a difference in the world, what truly makes our students better educated, better citizens, etc. And not just for faculty, but also for students. Similar thing I see, our programs tend to be quite, at least on my end, our program is really busy, packed with a lot of coursework. It's a professional program, so our students also have placements. And I know from experience that they don't have time to just sit and reflect on what they're learning and what that means for them, or what that might mean for their future. And I feel that's really, we're losing a lot there. Yeah,
Yeah, I think that plays into mental health too, to bring it around to what Joelle was saying.
for sure.
Xander.
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said, and jumping back to the last question with the Hugsy experience, I think that that was also a really important aspect of being at Hugsy, was understanding the way that so many different aspects of higher education work together and approach the challenges that they see, and how some challenges may be different in other areas. So I didn't have a good understanding of that before I came to Hugsy, so that's something that I'm extremely grateful for. I was also just quickly browsing the participants while we were talking about the challenges, and one thing that I actually written down, and actually I see Kate Osterman is here, Managing Director of the Harvard College Fund. When I was at the Harvard College Fund and also at Hugsy, that was the first time in Harvard's history that we published a gift policy guide. So thinking about the ways that universities interact, receive donations, and again, the trust and the promise that a university is making to its students and to its donors, that's really been called into question as of late. And I think that goes along with what Yulia was saying, was the overall distrust of all institutions of higher education. And actually had a meeting with our VP this morning, and she was mentioning that, not just the distrust on a social level, but the active and organized effort to remove funding from higher education, and at the end of the day create I'm not going to say uneducated, but a less educated, a populace with less access to education and developing critical thinking skills. That is something that is a challenging conversation, and it becomes quickly politicized. Unfortunately, even last week, I called someone who described themselves as a captain of industry, and then I had to sit on the phone and listen to them for 20 minutes as they described how they were actively in their field and talking to students, actively working to denigrate the reputation of the school that I work for, the school that they graduated from in the 90s, so not that long ago. But their main complaint was that, not that the students coming out of the college were lacking skills or lacking drive, but he believed that we were or we have been indoctrinating students to be woke, and that's just not going to fly in his industry. And we'll try to save some of them, but if someone is a free thinker, then he's going to terminate them. And he said those words to me. I was like, well, we're not taking you for a co-op, so cross you off the list. So it was really interesting to hear, and he didn't know who I was on the other side of the phone, but just the frankness that people really do not trust higher ed. And what are we as practitioners and as advocates and administrators, what are we going to do to rebuild that trust? Because I think, again, I bring up, give policy. I think in a lot of ways, it's been earned, the distrust of higher ed. And, Yulia mentioned endowments and this massing of wealth at the highly selective elite institutions, and the other institutions that don't get so much. So I think in some ways we've kind of created our own problem, but there will be a solution to it. But it is challenging, especially when you're supposed to be out there tooting the horn, and then you're coming back with people who have done very well with the education they received, but still harbor deep skepticism of the way things are going. So I'll stop there.
Thanks, Xander. So despite these looming challenges that we all just mentioned, what keeps you motivated professionally? Yulia.
September is such a funny time to ask what keeps admissions professionals motivated. Everything is fine. I mean, it's the best thing that we've got. Like, in the end, as much as there are a million gripes about higher education, as much as I will sing from the rooftops, who is this for? Who is this not for? Like, I've only ever worked on private, over-resourced, highly selective admissions. It has never been a meritocracy. At no point in the history of selective, over-resourced colleges has it ever been a meritocracy. And it's just like, that is really hard. And on the other hand, it's all we've got. It's the only thing that we have right now. Like, this is the very few engines of societal change. Education's really, really high up there. When you look at the things that can push people from the bottom quintile growing up to the top quintile as adults, or more importantly, just like from not being able to have the resources to sustain life and happiness to having the resources to sustain life and happiness, regardless of where you fall financially within that realm, education's really, really high up there in terms of what will get you there. It's also, to Xander's point, when you're looking at creating an educated populace, it is what allows democracy to continue to exist. Like, so many of the underpinnings of our society live in, at a minimum, K-12, growingly K-14, ideally eventually K-16. And so it ends up being this almost inevitability of, well, what else would I do? Like, I care about the world, and this is a way that the world is able to not just survive, but hopefully flourish. And so it becomes this thing where, yeah, like, it matters. It matters a lot. There's like a sappy story, sure, of like, you get to see the students and their parents dropping them off at move-in, and like, that's nice and all, but from a societal standpoint, like, my institution has 1,600 students total. We are tiny. We are not moving the needle on like necessarily the college-going population of the world. But knowing that on aggregate, the conversations we're able to have, the ways that we're able to push society, the doors we're able to open are fundamentally some of the very few doors that are opening. Like, at least being able to be part of that is something. It's not a sexy answer. It's not like an all-inspiring answer, but it's like, it's kind of, what else would we do? Like, this is one of the few things that could change. So we're going to do it because it makes things better. But again, not necessarily inspirational.
I think that's inspirational. It makes things better. Stefka.
Well, talk about inspirational. I've been sort of framing my answers around keywords. I'm not expecting people to notice that, but I talked about faith. I talked about time. I guess the keyword here would be hope. And so, yeah, despite all the looming challenges, I think hope is what keeps me going, honestly. And just yesterday, there was this big news that came out about how 4 out of the 6 main Earth systems have broken down already. So climate change is real. And so those kind of news are really depressing. And how could you get past this to move on so that you can continue living a productive life? And I think hope, again, is what keeps us going, and hoping that we can always do better. That's the faith and people potential and positivity. So back to the main challenge that I raised in the previous question, time, the lack of time for reflection both on students and faculty. I also hope that we as our program at my university do make every effort we can to provide more time for students, especially those who have challenges or special needs. And so we extend their programs or give them extra time when they need it. And same thing is also for faculty. I hope that we can, sometimes it's just a personal decision, and sometimes it could lead to sacrifices in your position or your professional goals or achievements. But if that's a priority that to you, you can devote some times to deeper reflection or delving deeper into a problem that's important to you, or devoting more time to a particular student who needs it. And so, yeah, I just say hope for in people's potential to do better.
Thanks, Stefka. Xander.
Yeah, again, I appreciate all the other panelists too, who are sharing their thoughts. And I also want to recognize for the audience that I haven't said a certain word yet, and that's like students. So I wasn't saying that for a big reveal or anything, but like, yeah, students are like really the thing that makes me so excited and keeps me motivated professionally. And even in my own journey, I had the privilege of being at particularly well-resourced institutions, including Hugsy. And then when I left Hugsy, I went across the river, the Charles River in Boston, and went to a not particularly selective institution, and one that actually relies a lot more on foundation and corporate partnerships and relationships, and we have a co-op program. So looking at and we're not a large college either, so I'm not going to make an argument that way, but looking at what we are able to offer and what students are taking us up on and what they're demanding, and that's I don't want to say return, but it is part of Wentworth's history. But hands-on learning, transformative in-person experiences, work opportunities, outside of the four-year college experience, workforce development programs, and then one that I'm particularly excited about is our pre-college programs. So we support a number of programs that are aimed at bringing in Boston youth and youth internationally, actually, into the STEM fields and giving them the opportunity to actually get their hands dirty and prototype and pitch an idea. And we have a leadership track for women who want to enter STEM fields, right? So these are the kind of things that I get very excited about, that we have made an investment in as an institution. And there are many other institutions doing similar great work. And to call out another person on the call, Max Espinoza, one thing that I'm looking at now is how can we engage industry partners, how can we engage foundations to help support us in that work? So it's kind of a tapestry that we all have to do it together. And these were things that weren't on my radar before I came to Hugsy. So again, developing that more critical thinking of how we can share the work and do it together, and actually engage students in a way that is meaningful, in ways that they're asking for, in ways that will be that will include social mobility as part of, again, the promise of higher education.
Thanks, Xander. And we'll round it out with Joelle.
Similar to Xander, it's the students. I can very confidently say that I love my students. There is something that is really moving about the fact that I am working with them at such a pivotal time in their lives. I work with first-year freshmen, right? Like, I am working at a traditional age, college campus. So I am seeing 17 to sometimes 19-year-olds, sometimes 20, depending on if they took, time off. And I am working with them at a really critical point in their lives, because for many of them, they are navigating their agency in ways they never have before. They are picking their own classes. They are getting themselves up. They are deciding what they want to eat for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, if they even want to eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner. When they go to bed, what they do on the weekends, what their activities are going to be. And it is so wonderful to get to see them move into this stage of their life. And I feel really privileged in the fact that those same students come to me and they say, Dean Balthazar, I don't know what I want to do next, or I need help. Can you tell me what I should do? Right. And I get a lot of, please tell me what I should do. And I flip that to, but what do you want to do? Right? This is your life. And I want you to navigate your time here, knowing that every decision that you have made is one that you made with your full chest, one that you made because it was one that you were confident in, that no one pressured you into, and one that you in 5 years can stand on and say, that's what I wanted to do, right? I think it's incredibly impactful that I get to see them on that journey. This is my 3rd year at Pomona. So I started in 2021, coming kind of off of the height of the pandemic, you would say. So the freshmen at that time were on Zoom high school. It was a challenge, right? It was an incredible challenge, and now we're some years later. Those students are juniors, and they're swinging by my office just to say hello. I'm no longer their class dean, but students are swinging by and saying, oh my gosh, like it's been a minute since I've seen you. I just wanted to say hi. I got that internship that I told you I wanted to do. I'm studying abroad next semester. I've had some who said, do I have to work with a new class team? Yes, you do. Yes, you do, because 400 students need me in their first years. But I love the fact that they come back and they want to tell me about the exciting things they did over the summer, what their plans are, if they, are applying to med school, all the things. And so it's building those relationships with them that really does keep me going, even on the hard days.
Joelle, I'm glad that we ended on your heartwarming response. So as I said in the chat, we're opening up to questions from the group. If you have questions you want to ask in the chat, that's fine. If you want to raise your hand, we'll take those questions as well. Or if you have a different topic that you think we should discuss, we can definitely have those. It looks like we have a question in the chat. The liberal arts are under attack right now, in part for political reasons and in part based on concerns about students being able to make a living when they graduate. What can be done to turn this around?
I think this is a me thing. It's partially, I'm looking at like me and Joelle right now being like us in our small liberal arts college world.
I can say an investment in career services is needed at colleges throughout the country. An investment in career services. I am really happy that I work at a World Resource Institution where we do that. Because I think right now, there's this idea of, well, you can't major in this, right? I will just be very flat out. The incoming students are telling me, if I don't major in STEM, how am I going to make any money? If I'm not majoring in econ, how will I be a consultant? If I'm not in business, what will I do, right? The humanities and social sciences, I do think, are under attack in some ways, right? I do a lot of work trying to get students to expand their viewpoint on what a career can look like and what success can look like, and also what independent living can look like and sustaining a life for themselves. And oftentimes it is because they have had minimal exposure to a life where they've just been told, be a doctor, be a lawyer, right? Be a doctor, be a lawyer, be a professional of that sort of thing, right? And so I really do think that the investment in career services will be really helpful in tapping into those alumni who are in those sorts of fields that maybe, are under attack right now. Because I think that students really do need exposure to the different opportunities that are out there. They need those connections to those internships. They need the connections to, the jobs post-grad. All of that is really needed, and I don't think they're getting that on a wide scale basis.
Thanks, Joelle. Yulia, I think the next question is yours. It's how are you thinking through enrollment strategies given the lower number of high school age students who are predicted to graduate high schools in the near future?
So this is the demographic cliff argument. I will say that actually this is not going to end up being my question because I work in a school with a 7% admit rate. So like, frankly, I'm not worried about like that. It sounds so crass, but like on a what are the real problems that are facing many institutions in this country? Many institutions are going to worry about the enrollment cliff. The schools that are already highly selective, like maybe we'll get a 10% acceptance rate instead of 7%. So Xander, you mentioned that being at potentially like, it's not really enrollment strategies, but is this anything that you've heard on your campus at all?
Yes, yeah. So this is those internal meetings, we are kind of a sink or swim depending on enrollment. We are a tuition-driven institution. One thing I will mention that I mentioned a little bit earlier was the importance of pre-college programs. So the fact that less students are graduating, there's not much that we can do to change that, but the more investment that we can make in helping students develop a college-going identity, and in some ways actually asking them to be really critical about what do they want out of higher education. Again, Wentworth's history is one of actually offering associate programs. We didn't have a full degree, 4-year degree program until 1972. So we have a lot of alumni who received their associates and have gone to work, built their own businesses, and become very successful. Those are my, $100,000 plus donors that I really want to hear from. So really thinking about, like, do you need 4 years of college, and are colleges going to be able to be nimble enough to respond to the demographic cliff, but respond in a way that actually adds value instead of removes it. And I know the question was directed more at liberal arts colleges. I think they need to ask themselves the same question. I am a product of a liberal arts education at Allegheny College out in Western PA, and that part of the country is going to be hit, or is actually being hit particularly hard. I don't know if they want me to share, but like when I was there, it was like maybe 2,100 students, and they were planning a strategic contraction to like maybe 17. Well, with the dual impact of the pandemic and the demographic cliff, they're at like 15 right now. So that's really, really tight when you're looking at tuition being one of your main revenue sources. So what are they offering? What are and I'll give them credit now. One of the things that they have on their website, which is really cool, is a little module that says, okay, if I have this degree, and I wish they had it for me when I was studying English, but like, if I have this degree, what are the career paths that are open to me? What are the things I can get excited about? What are things I can work towards? What are things I can pair together interdisciplinary that will get me to where I'll be able to be gainfully employed? So yeah, those are the things that I think colleges need to be thinking about, and it does take a little bit more investment, and also, again, those partnerships with communities and actually being open to the students that are going to be entering that college-going zone in the next coming years.
Thanks, Xander. Before we get to Andrew, there was a request in the chat to talk a little bit about the SCOTUS decisions on affirmative action and in terms of impact and ongoing work. I'll share quickly that I feel like 50% of my job these days is dealing with the Supreme Court decisions and how our institution is responding to them. It's been like that since November, honestly, preparing, coming up with inventories of lists of what potentially could be impacted. Now it's all about risk mitigation. And I think, honestly, most of us knew what was coming. So from the admissions standpoint, we were prepared. We have things that, okay, we're not going to do this. We're going to look at this instead. We're going to change our holistic process slightly, right? It's not huge dramatic changes. They might have dramatic impacts, but they're not huge dramatic changes. I think the next thing that we're going to see, since there's a lack of guidance, the Department of Ed gave lots of guidance on admissions. They gave lots of guidance on support and pathway programs. There has been no guidance on scholarships. But you are seeing large, important institutions like Yale come out now and say, well, we can't use race and scholarships anymore. And that's alarming to some folks, right? Because you have some states right now who are like, their state legislatures are like, yep, look at that. You can't use it anymore. And Missouri, we saw right away, was like, yep, let's take it out. I live in a purple state that is much more red than blue. And we have a state legislature that's like, what are you going to do? We don't want to see race and scholarships anymore, right? So that's a lot of time and effort when we're talking about donors, right? Going back to donors potentially and telling them you can't have this in your scholarship, and they may not agree, or how are you going to award them? I think that's where we're pivoting now, and we'll see a lot of impacts from that. And it's time consuming to change old MOUs for scholarships. It's time consuming to find people who are related to people who wrote a scholarship hundreds of years ago to be able to change these things, and just to mitigate the risk involved. There's a lot of time and effort that's going into that on my campus, and I'd have to assume it's the same at others as well. Does anyone else want to weigh in on that one?
We have a number of dead funds. scholarship based, but also things that just aren't offered as part of higher education anymore. So I do like, yeah, that is very much a challenge, but I think they're like, yes, it's gonna take the work to do it. But I think that colleges also do need to start getting more creative again about how they're writing scholarships, from the front end, but also maybe working with legislature to see if we can still have the intended impact. But you're right, no one's no one's making it easy, and like there's nothing worse than sitting on, and it's not a lot of money that we have, but like sitting on funds that you just straight up can't use, you're not keeping the promise to the students, you're not keeping the promise to the donors. And maybe even it's starting the conversation like, okay, well, you're able to give the scholarship, now it's not able to be used. What else, what other work can we engage you in? Can we partner on to have these things be redressed properly from the social and state level? Again, I think partnership is really going to be a big thing to make sure we're getting kids into school and getting those who need the support access to those resources.
Yeah, thanks, Xander.
Also, the only thing I'll add is that a lot fewer schools use race last year than we think. I want to say it's something like 20% of colleges use race as a factor in their admissions process. So while many of the names of those 20%, it's not actually as big of a hit to the field of higher education as we often think. I would say that the financial aid piece is really super important. I think the big risk here is that we are overcorrecting. So I see Linda in the comments says recruiting. Like the tough thing about recruiting is it implies that we weren't recruiting these students to begin with, which like historically, absolutely, but at least recently, it's not like we weren't thinking about under matching populations up until this past June. So it is this kind of tough thing where it involves partnerships, it involves being really careful to not find yourself on the other end of the law, on the other end of a legal battle, while also supporting your mission. I mean, I don't want us to overcorrect as an industry. The case says nothing about financial aid. The case says nothing about recruitment. The case says nothing about yield. Like there are still many ways for us to stick to our missions, which for the vast majority of our institutions involves introducing a class of diverse students to learn together. So I think read the case. If you are involved in any way with anything that has to do with race conscious admissions, read the case, like sit down, take the hour, read it, because listening to what other people say, it's really easy to think that it's all over when there is still a lot of room here for us to do the work that is, again, highly mission driven.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. All right. Now that we wrapped with that question, Andrew.
Hi, everyone. And Corey, thanks for taking my question. It's great to see you and Xander as well. We're classmates. And this conversation, great. Thanks so much for having it. My question, and mind you, I did come in a little bit late, so if you have already touched on this, I apologize. But I wanted to ask about some of the impacts that we're seeing of like Zoom school playing out, and I'll actually put the question in the chat so everyone can see it as well. As we see it playing out, we're undergrads who spend a chunk of time in high school Zooming the class, in extracurriculars, et cetera. Like, what are some strategies y'all have employed to ground students and being back in person? Like, I'm encountering a lot of issues with students who like are used to just like being Zooming back to back, but it's like in person, you can't quite do that. And you have to commit to one thing or the other. Like, you have to make an actual decision. Whereas like in Zooms, you can sort of like, sort of multitask a little bit easier. So just trying to ask a question in terms of what are some strategies you all have employed to like work with students who are encountering issues of like overcommitment, overscheduling, and not being as mindful of what the expectations are about being in person versus like being on the Zoom screen all day.
Thanks for that, Andrew. Stefka, do you have a response as the professor of the group?
Sure. I'm wondering whether in the US it's somehow different than in Canada, but I would say in the past 2 years already, we've sort of set pretty standard expectation that classes are in person. So it's just, we do have technically hybrid teaching as well, but it's only in specific cases. If you're an instructor, you have to explain why you think hybrid is necessary for the purposes of the goals of your class. But students are generally told they have to be on campus, they have to be in person. And we haven't had an issue. I think sort of Zoom has become more, we actually do more Zoom faculty staff meetings rather than teaching. So it hasn't been as much of an issue.
Anyone else have a response?
Yeah, I will say that, you know, for coming out of the Manhattan debate, like I said, I started this position in 2021. I think for me, I've seen less students who are overcommitted post-Zooming, and rather the class of 2025 had a really big challenge with socializing and getting out of their rooms. More and more students are asking for single rooms, right? More and more students are asking, you know, I just don't feel well. Can I zoom in on this, right? Again, similar to Stefka, we are working at a residential 4-year college, right? In-person classes. Prior to Zoom, this was not a question of can I zoom in? And so I think the increasing challenge, specifically, I would say for the class of 2025, was, hey, you are telling me you don't have any friends, but you're also telling me that you don't leave your room. How do we work together to do that? Because I can't leave your room for you, you know? And so I think over the last 2 years, though, I have seen that teeter off. I'm seeing, you know, the current first years who are much more like they're out, they're bipping and they're bopping, they're talking to people, they're hanging out with their orientation groups, those sorts of things. But I didn't necessarily see, in all honesty, I think overcommitment is has been an increasingly large issue amongst students in general, right? They get overcommitted, you know, starting in middle school with extracurriculars, to high school, to, you know, now I have to do it because I need to get into college, to now they're at college, well, I have to do it because I did it in high school and I know I'm good at it, right? So they feel the need to do all the things because we tell them to take up advantage of the opportunities to do all the things. But, you know, it's just, they again have to navigate their own independence and agency and figuring out what that balance is.
Thanks, Joelle. We have 2 minutes left if anyone else has any questions. Nat, I had one last question that the group can see if they can get through quickly. The last one that we had was, what's one piece of advice that you always give to someone who's exploring a career in education, higher education? Xander, do you want to go first?
Yeah, this was it's like simple advice, but it's something that one of my managers, who actually is a Hugsy alumni, said to me when I was at Harvard College Fund. And every single time a review period came around, they asked me to kind of keep a list. I didn't have to share it with them, but keep an idea of what you like to do and what you want to do more of in your job versus what you don't like to do and what you'd like to do less of. Coming from the administrative assistant position, it's really interesting to see the friends that I made who are we kind of all started on the same like level, doing a bunch of different things. And some people have gone into institutional research, some people have gone into like more operations and data side of things, and other people have gone into fundraising. So yes, there's kind of a pre-selected path towards development work with that kind of job cohort. But the advice I was given is to lean into my strengths and really be strategic about maximizing those things that you do want to do.
Thanks, Xander. Julia, Joelle, or Stefka, any of you have a final answer you want to give for that to end our time together?
Sure, I can jump in. I would say, again, I hope it doesn't sound banal, but I tell my students always, for being a faculty member, so academic positions, is make sure you love what you do because it's a very demanding job and with a lot of other expectations. So, and you really can easily lose track of what's priority and what's important to you, just as Sandra just said. So make sure that you're really basically committed, motivated, excited about your own, typically in our case, research and teaching, so that it continue and endures. You can maintain this job for a ideally long period of time. Otherwise you can burn out pretty quickly.
Thanks so much. Well, I think that's all we have time for today. Lisa, do you have anything else that we need to tell the group?
No, I just wanted to say thank you all so much. This was so interesting. I know I was really excited for this panel selfishly because I'm also in higher education. But this was really fantastic. And I was just putting into the chat that next week, everyone who registered will receive an email with the recording and with our panelists' information. So please look out for that. And again, thank you all.
Thank you so much. Hope everyone has a great rest of their week.